Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing. Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay. Okay, we start with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, and today is August 8th, 2015. Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay, so today we will be doing Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 136. This is called the Mahākammavibhanga Sutta, which means the great or the large discourse on the analysis of action of kamma. And it's a rather complicated and it could be a little bit confusing sutta. And so, in order to clarify the structure of the sutta first for myself, so that I don't get entangled in it, I started to outline the development. And then I thought, let me type this up so that I could have an outline that I could give to everybody so we could all together wend our way through the complexities of the sutta. Anybody come in late that didn't get a copy? I have a few more. Okay. You just take them all. Just see if anybody else needs. Okay, so first, the sutta takes place when the Buddha is living in Rajgir at the bamboo grove. And there's a little background story before the actual exposition by the Buddha takes place. And so as the background story, we have a monk by the name of Samidhi who is living in a forest hut. And we met this monk named Samidhi a few weeks ago when we took the Bhiddeka Ratta Sutta, one of the Bhiddeka Ratta Suttas. He was the monk who was bathing early in the morning, and then the deity came to him and asked him whether he knows the Bhiddeka Ratta verses, and then he says no. Okay, so then a wanderer by the name of Potaliputta, I don't think we meet him anyplace else in the suttas. He's wandering around, and then he sees the Venerable Samidhi, and they exchange greetings. And then he says he wants to test the Venerable Samidhi. And so he says to him, "Friend Samidhi, I heard and learned this from the ascetic Gautama's own lips." Then he quotes the statement that he's ascribing to the Buddha, that bodily action is vain, verbal action is vain, only mental action is real. And the word that's translated here as vain is the Pali word moga. Yeah, the word moga is used in various senses in the suttas. Sometimes it's used in the sense of foolish. Like when the Buddha sometimes, when somebody makes a foolish statement, the Buddha criticizes that person as being moga purisa, a foolish or an empty-headed man. But in this case, the commentary explains the word moga as, it uses the word apala, which means not bearing fruit. So the idea here is that this wanderer thinks that the Buddha said that bodily action doesn't produce fruit or results, verbal action doesn't produce results, but only mental action produces results. Only mental action is real. And the word that's translated real here is the Pali word satya, which elsewhere means true, like in the Four Noble Arya Satyani, Four Noble Truths. But here the word satya seems to have the implication of effective, capable of producing results. Okay, so that's the first statement that he ascribes to the Buddha. And then there's another one, which he says, here the Buddha say, there is that attainment, that meditative state, on entering which one does not feel or does not experience anything at all. Okay, when he says this, then Samidhi objects, he protests against that. And he says, do not say so, friend Potaliputa, do not say so. Do not misrepresent the Blessed One. It is not good to misrepresent the Blessed One. The Blessed One, the Buddha, wouldn't say this, that bodily action is vain, verbal action is vain, only mental action is real. But friend, there is that attainment on entering which one does not feel, does not experience anything at all. Okay, what do you think? Was the wanderer Potaliputa misrepresenting the Buddha? And if he was misrepresenting him, did he have any basis for that misrepresentation? Anything that he could have been misunderstanding, misinterpreting? Yeah, take the microphone.
Yeah, it seems like he's misrepresenting that there's no consequences to action or speech. But then in the next line, there is that attainment on which one does not feel anything at all. And can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I'm not sure that it's kind of contradictory, those two statements, in a certain way.
I don't see them as contradictory necessarily. But it seems that he might have heard something and then misunderstood it and misinterpreted it. Has anybody ever read the Dhammapada? No? I think there are free copies in the Great Buddha Hall on the table. There's a little book, it's about this size. What could he have been misinterpreting? Who has read the Dhammapada? Two people. Who's come to my Abhidhamma courses? You come to Abhidhamma courses but haven't read the Dhammapada. It's like going to an advanced physics course without having done... Yeah. Richard, you didn't want to admit it. Anybody know the first two verses of the Dhammapada? Wow! And then continue. Yeah. Right. Okay, very good. Did everybody understand? Can you translate it? Yeah, it's the first line a little difficult, but try. Yeah, they want to pass the microphone to you. And I think the CBS News is coming to.
I'll try, Bhante.
Okay.
Yeah. Mind is the forerunner, Mahākammavibhanga Mahādhamma. Mano Setta, mind is the. I think I'm gonna not do this right. Mind
okay,
is
okay. I'll help you. Mahākammavibhanga Mahādhamma. So mind is the forerunner of all things. Mind, Mano Setta, mind is chief. Well, they have mind is their chief. Mano Maya, they are made by the mind. Manasacha padutena basativa. So if one speaks or acts with a defiled mind, then suffering follows, like as the wheel follows the foot of the ox. Then the next verse repeats the first line. Mind is the forerunner of all things. They are made. Mind is their chief. They are made by mind. If one speaks or acts with a pure mind, then happiness follows, like the shadow that never departs. So in other words, the first verse of the Dhammapada is emphasizing that mind is sort of the chief factor in all types of action, even bodily action, verbal action. But it doesn't mean that bodily action and verbal action don't produce results. It's just that the moral quality of bodily action and verbal action is determined by the state of the mind, and that all actions flow out from the mind. And so our wanderer here, Potaliputa, he might have heard those verses or something similar, and then misconstrued them to think that only mind is important, that bodily action, verbal action are unimportant. And then how about the second part, that there is that attainment on entering which one does not feel anything at all? Does that seem to have a basis in the actual teaching? Getting close, but not yet the fourth jhana. In the fourth jhana, there's still a feeling, it's neutral feeling. Not quite, getting closer. That's what he said, getting very close. Excuse me? Right. It's the attainment called It's actually called the cessation of perception and feeling, sanya vedayita nirodha. So it seems that this part of the Buddha's teaching he got right, though he didn't express it quite in the standard canonical way. Okay, so after Samiti says that, then Potaliputta says to him, how long is it since you went forth, since you became a monk? And then Samiti says, not long, 3 years. Okay, and then Potaliputta asks Samiti another question. He says, having done an intentional action by way of body, speech, or mind, what does one feel? Then Samiti says, if one does an intentional action by way of body, speech, or mind, one feels suffering, friend Potaliputta. Okay, was Samiti correct about this? That if one does any kind of action, I'm speaking now, it's a verbal action, I'm feeling suffering? Yeah. Yeah. So he got that wrong. Okay, so then the wanderer Potaliputta, without either approving or rejecting the words of Samiti, he just got up and departed. Okay, so then sometime afterwards, the monk Samiti went to the Venerable Ananda and reported this conversation to him. And then Ananda said that this conversation should be reported to the Blessed One. And so they go to the Blessed One, to the Buddha, and they report the whole conversation to him. And then the Buddha says to Ananda, he says, I do not recall ever having seen the wanderer Potaliputta. So how could this conversation have taken place? Okay, then he says, though the wanderer this is the important point, though the wanderer Potaliputta's question should have been analyzed before being answered, this misguided man, Samiti, answered it one-sidedly. That is, the Buddha, in other suttas, he distinguishes 4 ways in which a question should be answered. So one way is by giving what's called a categorical answer, a straight, definite answer. So if somebody asks, are all conditioned phenomena impermanent? Then there's no doubt about this. The answer is definitely yes. If somebody asks, is there a soul or a permanent self that experiences and does actions, then a categorical answer can be given, no. So that's the categorical answer. Another type of question that somebody might ask, the answer should be answered by making a distinction. I'm trying to think that there was an example of this. Okay, let me think of another example from another sutta. Okay, somebody comes to the Buddha and says, are all of your disciples practicing correctly? So in this case, the Buddha will answer by making a distinction. He'll say that those who are practicing according to the Noble Eightfold Path, those are practicing correctly. Those disciples, even though they're my disciples, but if they are practicing the wrong Eightfold Path, if they have wrong views, wrong intentions, and so on, then they are not practicing correctly. They're practicing wrongly. So this would be a question that's answered by making a distinction. A third way of answering a question is by asking a counter question. My mind goes blank trying to think of it. I'm sure that there are hundreds of examples, but my mind has just gone blank. Okay, the fourth way of answering a question is called tappaniyang, which means putting the question aside, dismissing the question as being improper or irrelevant. So this is the chief example of this type of questions are the questions that called the 10 types of indeterminate points. So is the world eternal or is the world non-eternal? Is the world infinite in space or finite in space? Is the soul or the life principle identical with the body or separate from the body? Does the enlightened one exist after death or not exist after death? So those questions, the Buddha, when he's asked those questions, he just dismisses them. So in this case, the Buddha said that Sammiddhi has given a definitive answer to the question. That is when he said that whatever action one does, whatever intentional action one does, by body, speech, or mind, one feels suffering. So this was a question which should have been analyzed, or a distinction should have been made, that there are some bodily, verbal, mental actions that one performs. When one performs them, one experiences suffering. There are other actions of body, speech, and mind that one performs, and in performing them, one experiences pleasure or happiness. But instead, the Buddha says, Sammiddhi answered one-sidedly. Okay, now, this is a little strange. Another monk named Udayi then speaks up and says that perhaps the Venerable Sammiddhi spoke thus, referring to another statement of the Buddha, which is that whatever is felt, whether pleasure, pain, or neutral feeling, is included in dukkha, in suffering. Okay, now when Udayi says that, then the Buddha addresses the Venerable Ananda and he says, see how this misguided man, and here the expression is moga purisa, foolish man Udayi, interferes. I knew that this misguided man Udayi would unduly interfere right now. And I say this as puzzling or strange because it seems to me, maybe I am a misguided man myself, but it seems that Udayi gave the correct explanation. It seems that Sammiddhi had heard the Buddha make that statement, which has a different type of meaning, that whatever is felt is included in dukkha, in the sense of being unsatisfactory, inadequate, defective, flawed. And then he misunderstood that and took it to mean that whatever is felt is a experience of suffering. So it seems to me that Udayi actually gave a correct statement here. So I don't understand why the Buddha reproached him. Anybody else? Anybody have an idea? he answered correctly the second part of the first question about the attainment. Yeah. Well, he said when he said that the Blessed One would not speak thus, that is correct. Yeah. I don't think he's being admonished for that. I think he's being admonished for his statement that whatever intentional action one does, one feels suffering. But it seems that as I said, that Udayi gave the correct explanation of what was the basis for Samidhi's misunderstanding. And yet the Buddha reproaches him rather than says, that is correct. I don't understand why. Anybody else? Anybody have any idea? I don't think it's irrelevant, because he's saying that perhaps the Venerable Samiti said this referring to that other statement of the Buddha. Any ideas? Of course we can't say the Buddha's in a bad mood, but it seems... But this monk Udayi is almost like a fold-man, is that the expression? In the suttas. In other places, he interjects and does make statements which are definitely foolish and to be dismissed. And like he argues with the Venerable Sariputta, when Sariputta makes a statement, he argues with him and maintains his position very adamantly. But here he seems to have given the correct explanation. Anyway, that's a bit of a puzzle to me. Okay, so now the Buddha is going to clear up the misunderstanding. So he goes on to say, from the start, the wanderer had asked about the three kinds of feeling, and Samiti would have answered rightly if he had said, friend, having done an intentional action by way of body, speech, or mind, whose result is to be felt as pleasant, one feels pleasure. If one does an intentional action whose result is to be felt as painful, one feels pain. Having done an intentional action whose result is to be felt as neither painful nor pleasant, one feels neither pain nor pleasure. And so the Buddha distinguishes three types of actions according to the results that they can bring. And so if Samiti had understood the teaching correctly, then he would have distinguished the three types of actions according to their results, and would have explained that it's not correct to say that whatever one does, one experiences suffering. Okay, but then the Buddha says, he speaks a bit dismissively. Again, it seems like he's in a little bit of a hard mood. That who are these foolish, thoughtless, or unintelligent wanderers of other sects, that they could understand the Tathagata's great exposition of action. Then he says, you should listen, Ananda, to the Tathagata as he expounds the great exposition or great analysis of action. Okay, so now Ananda appeals to him and pleads with him to speak. And so the Buddha begins to speak, to give the analysis. And to understand the exposition that takes place here, I've divided it into, well, 4 main sections within a 5th concluding section. So the first section, which we're going to come to, is what I call the 4 situations. So this is the basis for the discussion. Did you get a copy of the handout? Excuse me? Oh, you could look on with Barbara's. Okay, so the first, we have now the 4 situations. So the first situation, here we have a person who breaks all of the moral principles. These are the 10 types of bad or unwholesome karma. He kills living beings, steals, commits sexual misconduct, speaks falsely, maliciously, harshly, gossips. He is covetous, has a mind of ill will, and holds wrong view. So then, after death, with the breakup of the body, he is reborn in a bad destination. So this is what I call the expected result. That is the natural result that we understand according to the working of karma. If one does bad, unwholesome deeds, breaks the principles of ethics, one generates akusala kamma, unwholesome karma, and that karma, its potential, its potency is to bring a rebirth into the lower realms, a bad destiny. Okay, but then we have case or situation number 2, where we have a person who kills living beings and so forth and holds wrong view. Then on the breakup of the body after death, he is reborn in a happy destination, even in the heavenly world. So this is what I call the result that's contrary to expectations. Okay, the third case, we have the person of virtuous conduct, somebody who abstains from killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, and so on, who speaks, who observes right speech, and he has a straight, pure mind and holds right view. So on the breakup of the body after death, he is reborn in a good destination, even in the heavenly world. So this is the expected result. And then we have the fourth case. This is somebody abstains from killing and holds right view. And then on the breakup of the body after death, he is reborn in a bad destination, even in a hell realm. So that's a result contrary to expectation. So we have these 4 cases that the Buddha is aware of. Okay, now we come to the second major section of the sutta. This is what I call the inferences of outside ascetics and Brahmins. That is, those ascetics and Brahmins who are able to develop abhinya or supernormal powers of knowledge, but they don't have, the detailed understanding of the Buddha's exposition of karma. In fact, even though the sutta is explained just by way of some ascetic or Brahmin, actually I use the expression outside ascetics or Brahmins, but it could also be a Buddhist ascetic who doesn't have an understanding of the detailed workings of karma. He also could come to the wrong conclusion. Okay, so we have here the first case. We have some ascetic or Brahmin, by means of his diligent practice of meditation, so he attains such a state of samadhi, ceto samadhi, deep meditative absorption. This would be particularly the 4th jhana, which is the basis for the super knowledges. So on the basis of that deep samadhi, then he develops what is called the divine eye, the Diva Chakku. This is the inner vision by which one can see other realms of existence. One could see events occurring in the heavenly realms, the hell realms, so that the whole, or at least the broad expanse of the multiple planes of existence open up to one's mental vision. So just as I sit here in the classroom and look out and see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tables with seats around them, so a person with the divine eye can direct that eye outwards and see maybe there are 6 heavenly realms here, the human realms and different realms of misery, the ghostly realm and the hell realms, and they'll all appear perfectly visible to him. And he'll also be able to see how people, human beings, pass away from the human realm and take rebirth in these other realms. Okay, so when he's focusing outward with the divine eye, he sees that person who has been killing living beings and committing other bad actions. And he sees that on the dissolution of the body, after death, he has been reborn in a bad destination, even in hell. Okay, so this is purely a matter of, call it empirical observation. This is what he sees. So then he makes a pronouncement based on that experience. He says, indeed, there are evil actions or evil karma. The word actions is not sufficient because the Pali uses the word kamma, which has, of course, anybody would say that there are evil actions. But when we use the word evil kamma, it suggests action with the potential to produce a kind of result that corresponds to the moral quality of the action. So there is evil karma, and there is the result of misconduct, that is the karmic result of misconduct. So that is his pronouncement. Then he gives the reason. So the reason is that here I saw a person who killed living beings and committed other bad deeds, and I see that with the breakup of the body after death, he has been reborn in a state of misery, a bad destination. Okay, then he makes a generalization. Then he says, on the dissolution of the body after death, everyone or anyone who kills living beings and in other ways breaks the moral precepts will be reborn in a bad destination, even in hell. And then he comes to a further statement about his assertion. He says, those who know thus know rightly, those who think otherwise are mistaken. And thus he obstinately adheres to what he has known, seen, and discovered, insisting, only this is true, anything else is wrong. So in my outline, I've broken up this inference or this section into five positions. So first comes the assertion, there is evil karma, the result of bad conduct. Then comes the reason, because I saw somebody who was transgressing moral principles, reborn in a bad destination. Then comes the third is the generalization. All who violate moral principles are reborn in hell. Then comes the claim made about that assertion. This alone is right view. And then fifth comes the attitude that he obstinately clings to his conclusion. Okay, now we come to the inferences based upon the second of the four situations. So here we have the ascetic who attains deep samadhi. He develops the divine eye. And then with the divine eye, he sees the person who kills, holds wrong view, and sees this person after death being reborn in a happy destiny, even in the heavenly world. So he draws the conclusion. He says there is no evil karma, and there is no karmic result of misconduct. Then he gives what I call the empirical observation, the basis for that. So the reason is that I saw a person, a human being, who was killing living beings and doing other bad deeds. And I saw that person, after death, taking rebirth in heaven. Okay, then he makes the generalization. He says that on the dissolution of the body after death, anyone who kills living beings and holds wrong view and so on will be reborn in a good destination, even in heaven. Okay, then he makes a broader generalization, where he makes a claim about his assertion. He says, those who know thus know rightly, those who think otherwise are mistaken. In other words, he's saying that this alone is right view. And then he adheres to that attitude and says, this alone is truth. So he obstinately adheres to his conclusion. Okay, then we could go through the next two quickly. So now we have the ascetic who develops the divine eye, and he sees somebody who is observing the moral principles, being reborn in heaven. And so he concludes that there is good karma, there's the result of good karma. Then the reason for I saw somebody who was observing moral principles, reborn in a good destination. This is the simple statement of empirical observation. Then comes third, the generalization. Everyone or anyone who observes moral principles is reborn in a good destination. This alone is the right view. And then he obstinately adheres to his conclusion. Okay, then comes the fourth position. Is this getting too complicated? Okay, good. Okay, so now we have the ascetic who develops the divine eye, and this ascetic sees somebody who is observing good conduct, following the moral precepts, taking rebirth in a bad destination. And this person then first he makes the empirical statement of observation. I'm sorry. I'm on number 4 now. I'm getting mixed up. Okay, he sees the person who's observing good conduct, who's following the moral precepts, being reborn in a bad destination, even in hell. So then he comes to the conclusion that there is no such thing as good karma. and there is no karmic result of good conduct. And then his reason is his observation, his direct observation. Because I saw somebody who was following the moral principles, reborn in a bad destination. Then he makes the generalization, everyone or anyone who observes moral conduct is reborn in a bad destination. And then he says, this alone is the right view, and he clings to that conclusion. Okay, so now we come to those are the four inferences that different ascetics and Brahmins are making about the workings of karma, whether karma works or doesn't work at all. Okay, now we come to the Buddha's assessment of these four situations and the claims that the Brahmins and ascetics are making about their experience. And you'll note here, this is very, very typical of the Buddha. This is his way of sort of analyzing. This is the vibhajja, why the Buddha is called vibhajjavada, one who speaks on the basis of analysis. Very, very precisely and minutely, he'll analyze each position, picking out what statements are justified, what statements are unjustifiable. Okay, so we start with case number one. So when a recluse or Brahmin says, indeed there is evil karma, there is the karmic result of misconduct, then I grant him this. So in the outline I say the Buddha agrees that there is evil karma and the result of misconduct. Okay, and then the Buddha continues, when that ascetic says, I saw a person here who killed living beings and so forth, being reborn in a bad destination, then I grant him this. Because that was what the ascetic saw for himself. It's sort of direct observation. So the Buddha won't dispute or reject what that ascetic has seen through direct observation. Of course, people have delusions. Maybe the Buddha would reject that. Like somebody doesn't really have the divine eye, but with his imagination, he just sees, this one has been reborn in the heavenly world. Maybe like Jim Jones of, where was it? In Central America, South America? Was it Guyana? Your country. Wow. No, I know he was American. Okay, so the Buddha has to admit the direct observation by the ascetic. Okay, but then, when the ascetic says, on the dissolution of the body after death, everyone who kills living beings and so forth is reborn in a bad destination, even in hell, I do not grant him this. That is the way I expressed it in the outline. The Buddha denies the conclusion that everyone who violates moral principles is going to be reborn in a bad destination. And then when the ascetic says, those who know this know rightly, those who think otherwise are mistaken, I do not grant him this. In other words, the Buddha denies that this is the definitive right view, a right view without any qualifications. And then when he obstinately clings to what he has known and seen, insisting only this is true, anything else is false, then I do not grant him this. And so here I say the Buddha rejects adhering to this and insisting that it's invariably true. So you could see how the Buddha makes very fine distinctions here. Yeah, yeah. The Buddha is not denying that he's known and seen this for himself, or that he's known and seen a person who committed bad deeds being reborn in hell. That he has seen for himself. What the Buddha is rejecting is the generalization based on that. Okay, now we come to case 2, and there's going to be some differences here from the previous case that are interesting. I think that there are some differences. Okay, let us see. Okay, so here we have the recluse who has seen a person Okay, here we have the case where the recluse has seen a person committing bad deeds and being reborn in a good destination, and then generalizing from that. Okay, so when a recluse or Brahmin says, there is no evil karma, there is no result of misconduct, here the Buddha says, I do not grant him this. That is, the Buddha disagrees that there is no evil karma and no result of karmic misconduct. So this is a difference from the first case where the Buddha agrees with the general principle that there's evil. The Buddha agrees that there is evil karma and the result of misconduct. Here the Buddha disagrees even with the first assertion. Okay, but when the person says, I saw somebody who violated the moral precepts being reborn in heaven, the Buddha says, I grant him this, because that's what he saw. And apparently, in this case, it was a true perception, not just an imaginary delusion. Okay, but then when he makes the generalization that anyone who kills living beings will be reborn in a good destination, I do not grant him this. When he makes the generalization, those who think thus think rightly, know rightly, the Buddha says, I do not grant him this. And then when he insists only this is true, anything else is wrong, the Buddha rejects this and says, I do not grant him this. So that's the second case. Now we come to the third case. This is where the ascetic or Brahmin has seen a person observing moral behavior, good behavior, and then after death taking rebirth in a good destination, maybe in heaven. Okay, so now this person, the Buddha says, when this person says there are good actions, there's good karma, and there is the result of good conduct, I grant him this. So the Buddha agrees, of course he has to agree, that there is such a thing as good karma and that this good action produces its result. Okay, and when the person says that I saw this for myself, of course the Buddha has to grant him that. But then when he makes the generalization, when he says, on the dissolution of the body after death, everyone who abstains from killing living beings and so forth will be reborn in a happy destination, even in the heavenly world. I do not grant him this. So even though the Buddha teaches people to do good deeds so that they'll be reborn in the heavenly world or achieve nirvana. But when somebody makes the generalization that anyone who performs good deeds will necessarily be reborn in the next life in a good destination, the Buddha says, I don't accept that. Again, when the ascetic claims, those who know thus know rightly, this is the right view, everyone else is mistaken, I do not grant him this. And when he adheres to this and says, this alone is true, anything else is false,